It's an honor for me to be here with you and to speak about Bronisław Geremek and his contribution to the unification of Europe. I've met Professor Geremek only once or twice, but I would like still to recall the first time I met him. I was still a kid and I was waiting for my mother, who was working in Geneva at the airport, Warsaw Airport. And I've seen Geremek getting out of the airport, you know, with a crowd of people leaving a plane. And this is very symbolic because that's basically what he was doing all his life. He was traveling, trying to connect people on different levels. First as a scholar, then as one of the leaders of the democratic opposition, and finally as a Polish diplomat and Polish statesman. Bronisław Geremek was born in 1932 in Poland in a Jewish family. Most of his relatives perished during the Second World War, during the Holocaust. He would very rarely mention that, so we cannot exactly say how his childhood influenced him, but probably did in a way. Like several people from his generation, in early 50s, he joined the Communist Party. First, because he did not appreciate the right-wing nationalist aspects of, let's say, Polish political life and identity. But second, because at that time, being member of the Communist Party was the only way to be active politically, socially. If you wanted to do anything out of your job, let's say, you had to join the Communist Party, but it was not the most important. He decided to study history, and he decided to study the history of the Middle Ages because this period was less dominated by communist propaganda. You could study it more freely than, let's say, 19th or 20th century. It was politically very sensitive for the Marxists. And quickly he went to France, where he received a scholarship of the 6th section of the École pratique des hautes études in Paris. And for years he would cooperate with French historians, especially those related to the famous Annales school, l'École des Annales, like Fernand Braudel. So people who proposed a completely new approach to history, not to study political history, diplomatic history of the kings and princes, but economic and social history, longue durée, as they would say in French, processes, and he would write on that. He would write on the history of margins of society in late medieval Paris, les marginaux parisiens au XIVe et XVe siècle. And this made him really famous as a Polish scholar. He would later write also about German Reich, about England, about the history of Europe. This would bring him at the end, since 2002, to the position of the head of the Chair of European Civilization at the College of Europe in Natolin. But speaking about this first part of his life, when he was mainly a scholar, a researcher, I think that 3 or 4 points are very important. First, he was a spiritual, an intellectual rather, ambassador of communist Poland in the West, in particular in France. This was very important because during the Cold War era, East-West contacts, especially in the late 50s, early 60s, they were relatively limited. So such contacts were of importance to remind Western Europeans, we are there, okay? We are civilized people, we are European people, even if there is an Iron Curtain, even if there is a Soviet Union behind. This was of crucial importance, and he did it. He worked on France in France, which proved that he was really a an outstanding scholar if he would get paid by French people, French government, to work on French history. He worked on these marginal social groups, okay? So once again, he was sensitive to their faith. And finally, he also later worked on the history of Europe. As Ambassador Schnepp mentioned, in 1968, he left the Polish Communist Party, and within a few years he became very actively engaged in the different anti-communist activities. As a scholar, he was one of the organizers of so-called flying universities, so unofficial lectures, classes on non-Marxist history, on other very sensitive issues under the communist rule, but together with other intellectuals, he would also co-sign a famous, it was called Letter of Seven eminent Polish intellectuals who would protest against the amendments to the Polish Constitution in 1976, amendments which would confirm the leading role of the Communist Party and which would confirm Poland's friendship with Soviet Union. Another turning point and another connection and bridge. 1980, beginning of the Solidarity movement, Solidarity strikes. In the Gdańsk shipyard, August 1980, Bronisław Geremek, together with another intellectual, Catholic intellectual of the time, Tadeusz Mazowiecki, future prime minister, he goes to Gdańsk to support the shipyard workers. This is an important point in the history of communist Poland because basically Polish society would protest quite regularly against the communists, but these protests would go like workers' protests, intellectuals' protests, workers' protests, student protests, okay? So every 5-10 years somebody else would protest. And since late 70s, and especially since 1980, these two groups pool their forces, okay? So there are workers who go on strike and intellectuals who would advise them to try to run this protest in a peaceful way. Geremek, together with Mazowiecki, become key advisors to the Solidarity movement, to Lech Wałęsa, its leader. He is one of the co-authors of Solidarity political program Self-Governing Republic, adopted in 1981. And because of his contacts he has in the West, he also tries to get Poland economic aid during these 1980-1981 years, because the economic situation is disastrous. I mean, there is nothing to buy food in the shops. We have to queue for everything. Some people present here can confirm that. Yeah, thank you, Ambassador. If you allow me a break, I used to tell my students, especially foreign students, regularly, we didn't have toilet paper in the shops. And this is unbelievable. Finally, we got some students from Mexico who said, it's like in Venezuela today. So we were living in sort of, 40 years ago, Venezuela, Chavez-style country. So he's trying to cope with that. When the communists introduced the martial law in December 1981, he would be arrested and he would be put under a close, he would be taken care of by Polish secret services, but still he remains very active. He is in particular one of the authors of so-called alternative diplomacy in 1980s. So when there is a Western leader, a Western representative who comes to communist Poland, in the morning he meets the official leaders of the communist country, and in the afternoon he meets what used to be called ordinary citizens, like Lech Wałęsa or some other representatives of illegal solidarity. So formally, once again, it is delegalized, secret services are working on it, but at the same time, especially in the late 80s, both sides, including the West, start to recognize once again its existence, and here Geremek plays an important role. In